Young Colin, desperate and alone, managed to send a secret letter to his dad begging him to take him out of the facility for the first time since he penned the letter in crayon 8 years ago.
For years, people watched the Gosselin family drama unfold from the outside, never fully knowing what was happening behind closed doors. But now, at 22, Hannah Gosselin is finally speaking for herself. And what she's revealing is turning old questions into something far more uncomfortable. The daughter who stayed quiet for years is suddenly exposing painful details fans never expected to hear. And the deeper her story goes, the more shocking the situation becomes. She finally said it out loud. On July 18th of 2023, Vice TV aired the premiere episode of a documentary series called Dark Side of the 2000s. And the entire episode was dedicated to unpacking the real story hiding behind Jon and Kate Plus 8, a reality show that had quietly faded from public attention years earlier, but had never truly released the 8 children who had been forced to grow up inside its production. Picture 19-year-old Hannah Gosselin sitting down in front of that documentary camera, looking absolutely nothing like the cheerful little color-coded girl that America remembered from a decade of weekly television, and beginning to speak in a way that no Gosselin child had ever spoken publicly before that moment. She was not performing for the lens. She was not delivering rehearsed, family-friendly sound bites designed to protect the brand her childhood had been built around. She was speaking plainly and specifically and without flinching once, describing in calm and measured detail exactly what her brother Colin's separation from the rest of the household had actually looked like during the years they were growing up together inside that quiet Pennsylvania home. She described how Colin had never been permitted to sit at the dinner table with the rest of his 7 siblings during meals, how he was kept indoors while the other children played freely in the yard outside, and how meals across the entire household were scheduled deliberately so that Colin would always end up eating alone at completely different times than everyone else under the same roof. Hannah said all of this without raising her voice a single time, without crying at any point during the entire interview, and without doing anything that would have allowed someone watching at home to dismiss what she was saying as emotional venting rather than actual fact. And that quiet restraint was exactly what made every single word she spoke land with the weight of something permanent and impossible to ignore. Hannah's exact words during that interview were deliberate and precise, and you really should hear them the way she actually said them on camera. She told viewers that Colin would not get to come outside and play with the rest of them, that he would eat dinner at completely different times than they did, and that she did not believe any real effort had ever been made inside the home to help Colin learn what acceptable behavior actually looked like for a child his age. Then she went even further than that, telling the entire viewing audience that the family did not speak to Colin at all during the years he was placed inside the psychiatric facility, that they did not even know where in the country he was being held during that long period, and that she simply could not understand why her own mother would do something like that to one of her own children. What made that documentary moment feel genuinely different from every other Gosselin appearance that had ever aired was the complete absence of anger inside it. Hannah did not perform grief or outrage or sisterly heartbreak for the cameras at any point during the interview, and she was not asking the audience to feel sorry for her in any way. She was simply reporting events that had genuinely happened to her family, using the flat and deliberate language of a young woman who had spent years thinking carefully about exactly what she was going to say out loud, and who had at long last arrived at the moment when she was finally ready to say all of it. To understand what it actually cost Hannah to sit in that studio and say what she said, you genuinely have to go all the way back to the very beginning. Back to a small house in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. Born into a brand. The version of the origin story that you were probably told over the years goes something like this. A young Pennsylvania couple welcomed a set of twins into the world, then against extraordinary medical odds, welcomed 6 more children all at once a few years later. and shortly afterward a friendly camera crew showed up at their door to capture the chaos of raising 8 little kids under one roof, while a nation tuned in and fell in love with the family. That is the marketing copy. That is the brochure version of events. The actual origin story is meaningfully different from what you were sold for years, and the difference between the two genuinely matters here. The Gosselin family's relationship with cameras did not begin with their famous hit show on TLC at all. It actually began back in 2005 with a Discovery Health Network special called Surviving Sextuplets and Twins, filmed when Hannah Gosselin and her 5 same-aged siblings were barely 1 year old and could not even speak in full sentences yet. A follow-up special then aired the very next year in 2006. Both of those specials performed well enough in the ratings that TLC offered the family their own ongoing weekly series in 2007, which means that by the time the show that everyone actually remembers premiered on cable, cameras had already been recording Hannah's daily life consistently for nearly 2 full years of her young life. She was 3 years old when Jon and Kate Plus 8 officially launched, and she had absolutely no memory of any version of childhood that did not involve a production crew showing up at her house multiple days every single week of the year. Pause and consider what that actually means for a moment, because it is so important to understanding everything that came afterward. These were not children who grew up and then made an informed decision to appear on television once they were old enough to actually understand what television was. They were children for whom the cameras were the basic environment of childhood itself from day one. The cameras were not something that arrived in their lives at some later point. The cameras, quite simply, were their entire lives from the very start of their conscious memory. The show eventually became absolutely enormous in a way that is genuinely difficult to fully appreciate now that the reality television landscape has shifted so much over the years. The 5th season premiere in May of 2009 drew in 9.8 million American viewers, making it the most watched single program of that entire evening across every network in the country at the time, which means the Gosselin children were not just successful cable reality television. They had quickly become a full-blown American cultural phenomenon. Sitting underneath that entire phenomenon was a financial arrangement with very clearly defined commercial stakes that you genuinely need to understand. Jon Gosselin himself confirmed in a 2009 interview with Larry King on CNN,
Jody and her husband went public with allegations that your kids were being exploited and overworked. Criticism as ridiculous. Watch.
That the family was being paid roughly $22,500 per single episode during the final season of the original show. Other reports published at the height of the show's commercial peak cited figures ranging anywhere from $50,000 all the way up to $75,000 per episode for the full production package. Kate, who continued on as the sole star of a spin-off after Jon eventually left, was reported by TV Guide to be earning a staggering $250,000 per episode of Kate Plus 8 entirely on her own. The 8 children themselves received absolutely nothing individually from any of this enormous financial arrangement happening above their heads. If you think that part is wild already, what comes next is honestly going to make all of this look completely tame by comparison. Behind the color-coded matching outfits and the carefully scheduled cheerful chaos that aired every single week, one of those 8 children was already being treated in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with ratings or production schedules. What was happening to Colin Gosselin was happening in the corners of the house where the cameras were specifically told not to look. The boy who disappeared from the frame. Hannah has been very clear in multiple interviews over the years that she did not figure out what was happening to her brother Colin through any single dramatic moment that you could ever point to on a calendar and label the turning point. The realization came over time through pure accumulation. through small daily exclusions that each one on their own might have looked like ordinary discipline or basic parenting from the outside, but which taken all together over the course of many years painted a deeply disturbing picture of something far worse than just discipline. Colin was simply not at the dinner table when the rest of the family sat down together for meals each evening. Colin was not allowed to come outside and join the games when his 5 same-aged siblings spilled out into the yard to play together. While the other Gosselin children ran around in those carefully matched outfits that television viewers remember so clearly, Colin remained inside the house in a specific area that Kate herself reportedly referred to as a containment space. Hannah, who was still a young child herself during all of this, simply did not have the vocabulary or the emotional framework yet to describe what she was witnessing in real time around her every single day. She only had the deep gut sense that something was very badly wrong inside her own family home. In the 2023 Vice documentary, Colin himself described in his own words what he believes ultimately triggered the escalation of how he was being treated by his mother during that period. He explained that he had grown completely exhausted.
My mother became physically aggressive. Multiple times she had zip-tied my hands. I was fully isolated from everybody. I had no friends.
By the constant pressure to perform for the production cameras, and had started quietly refusing to cooperate with the crew, sitting silently during interview segments, declining to engage with the questions being asked of him, and generally going limp inside the manufactured cheerfulness of the entire show. He told viewers directly on camera that there was just this point in filming where he decided he did not want to show up on camera anymore, and that he would sit there and be completely silent during interviews, refusing to interact or do what he had to do. But Colin has been equally clear in his interviews that simply refusing to film was not what truly led to his eventual institutionalization. And this particular distinction matters enormously in understanding everything that followed. He had also started telling teachers at his school that he was being abused at home by his mother, and his mother eventually found out that he was talking openly about it. He said directly in his own words that he was starting to tell people what was going on at home, and that she caught wind of that and had to put him somewhere where he would not be able to get the secrets out. In the year 2016, when Colin Gosselin was just 12 years old, Kate placed him inside the Fairmount Behavioral Health Institute, located in Philadelphia, without any meaningful warning to anyone in the rest of the family. Jon Gosselin did not even know that this had happened to his own son. He only found out about it by complete accident when he showed up at Colin's school for a previously scheduled lunch visit one afternoon, and was casually informed by the guidance counselor that Colin was no longer enrolled in classes there. Jon then sought formal legal intervention to figure out exactly where his own son had been taken, and he was repeatedly stonewalled by both the legal and medical systems for months on end, with absolutely no information about where his child was being held. Then, in 2017, a letter finally arrived at Jon's house, and what was written inside that envelope was something no parent should ever have to receive in their mailbox. It was written entirely in crayon, because Colin had no access to any standard writing materials inside the facility where he was being held. And in that crayon letter, the boy begged his father to please come and get him out of there as soon as possible. Now pause right here for a second, because in September of 2024, in a detailed interview given to the U.S. Colin finally revealed the one specific detail that made everything that had come before it impossible for anyone to ever explain away again. Before the facility, before the institutionalization at Fairmount, there was a room. Kate had a room actually constructed inside the unfinished storage section of the family's basement, and that room had multiple cameras installed inside of it, a single small window in one corner, a heavy bolt lock mounted on the outside of the door, and one thin mattress placed on the floor. Colin then described in painful detail exactly what happened inside that constructed basement room when he was placed in there as a child. His own mother would put him inside it. His hands and his feet were both zip-tied together so that he could not move freely at all. The door was bolt-locked from the outside so that he physically could not leave even if he tried. The lights were turned completely off so that he sat alone in total darkness. And the cameras watched everything that happened inside. He estimated that this practice began when he was somewhere around 8 or 9 years old, and he said in his own words that most of his day was spent inside that room and that he was kept away from his siblings and almost never went outside the house at all. Hannah eventually learned about the basement room and what her own brother had been living through while she slept just 2 floors above him every single night. That was the exact day she told her father she was not going back to her mother's house ever again. The architecture of control. For the 7 Gosselin children who were not Colin, the household their mother was running was not defined by a basement room with a bolt mounted on the outside of the door, because none of them ever personally experienced that particular treatment themselves. Their household was defined instead by something more pervasive, more atmospheric, and frankly, more difficult to even name out loud in normal conversation. Total environmental control, presented to the outside world as exceptional parenting and disciplined household management. Every single hour of every single day inside that Pennsylvania household was structured down to the minute. Meals were served at very specific intervals across the day. Clothing was assigned and color-coded for visual purposes during filming. Emotional expression itself was carefully regulated by the woman running the entire home. Obedience was completely non-negotiable, and any deviation from the expected behavior carried real consequences that all the children quickly learned to fear deeply. Hannah has explained in multiple interviews across the years that the pressure she felt inside that house was not really physical in nature at all. It was atmospheric, almost gravitational, in how it surrounded everything happening inside the home. The house demanded a very specific performance of childhood at all times of the day, and stepping outside of that expected performance, even in small and harmless ways, had costs that all 8 of those children quickly learned to avoid at any price. Hannah herself kept cooperating with the cameras, even on the days when she genuinely did not want to be filmed at all. She told the Vice interviewer plainly during the documentary that she never felt like she was forced into filming, but that some days she just did not feel up to it, and yet she still did it anyway. That ongoing daily compliance, that willingness to keep performing the role expected of her, even when her own body and her own mind were telling her not to, is genuinely what kept her safe inside the household from suffering the same terrible fate that Colin eventually did suffer. Now, back in May of 2009, the state of Pennsylvania's own Department of Labor formally opened up an investigation into Jon and Kate plus 8 for what investigators suspected might be serious child labor violations occurring inside the production. The central legal question they were trying to actually answer was whether the 8 Gosselin children should legally be considered employees of the production company, and whether the labor permits required for such employment had ever actually been obtained by anyone involved. They had not been obtained. TLC, for its part, maintained throughout the entire investigation that the children were simply living their ordinary daily lives in front of the cameras, and that absolutely nobody was directing them. The state's Bureau of Labor Law Compliance disagreed sharply with that particular characterization. Their final report concluded that the children had in fact been employed under the legal definition of employment because they received direction from producers, had sustained ongoing participation in the series across many years, and the adults running the household were being financially compensated for that very participation. What no compliance agreement could ever actually measure was the internal cost for each child of growing up inside a household that functioned simultaneously as a family home, a workplace, and a corporate brand all at once. The escape. Throughout the entire year of 2017, Hannah's regular weekend visits to her father Jon's house had started getting noticeably longer in their duration, and her open reluctance to actually leave at the scheduled end of each visit was becoming much harder for her to conceal from any of the adults around her. Jon noticed the change happening before anyone else did. He later explained in interviews that Hannah arrived at his place looking anxious and visibly guarded every single time she came over, and she would deflate emotionally as the visit drew closer to its scheduled end on Sunday evening. These weekend visits were originally a standard feature of the post-divorce custody arrangement that the family court had laid out, and they were certainly not initially planned as any kind of escape route from her mother's house. But over time, they were quietly becoming exactly that for Hannah. In August of 2017, Kate Gosselin called the local police after Hannah simply refused to come back to her house following a scheduled visit at Jon's place. According to Jon's account of what happened on that day, Hannah had become genuinely distressed about returning to her mother and simply would not leave. Jon then sent Kate a text message informing her that he was keeping Hannah with him for the time being. Police officers arrived shortly afterward in response to Kate's call. Jon calmly explained to the responding officers that his daughter was 14 years old, that she did not want to go back to her mother's house, and that she was perfectly safe and well cared for at his home. Hannah then confirmed every word of this directly to the officers herself when they asked her about it. No charges were filed against anyone. Hannah simply stayed. At the time, it was actually happening in real time. The press largely covered the entire incident as just another chapter in an ongoing post-divorce custody battle between two messy public figures. But looking back at it now, from where we sit today, it was clearly something else entirely. It was a 14-year-old child using the only mechanism that was actually available to her at the time, which was her own physical body and her own spoken refusal to exercise a choice that no court had yet given her any formal legal right to make. Jon then formally filed for full legal custody of Hannah in 2018, and the court granted that custody to him shortly afterward. Around the same general window of time, Colin was also being released from the Fairmount facility, following years of his father fighting through the legal system, first to locate his missing son, and then to extract him from the place where he was being held. Jon said publicly during one interview that it took him 2.5 years to find him, and that it took him another year to actually get him out. Hannah had her freedom at last. She had her father back in her life. She had her brother safely out of that facility. What she did not yet have was any real idea of what it would actually cost to take the truth she had been quietly carrying inside her and say it out loud in front of a national camera. The public fallout. When that Vice documentary finally aired in July of 2023, Kate Gosselin responded to it publicly and remarkably quickly, which honestly surprised a lot of viewers who were fully expecting her to simply stay silent and ride out the news cycle. She posted a long and detailed written statement directly to her Instagram account in which she openly acknowledged Colin's psychiatric diagnoses, defended her decision to place him inside that facility as something that had been medically advised by professionals, and characterized her own actions throughout that entire period as those of a concerned mother, carefully following expert medical guidance from the start. Then something nobody had really been expecting happened next in the unfolding family conflict. Maddie Gosselin, the eldest of all the Gosselin children, publicly took her own mother's side in the rapidly escalating situation. She alleged that Colin had been violent toward other members of the household during his childhood years and openly challenged the entire narrative that Jon, Hannah, and Colin had presented together inside that Vice documentary. That public decision placed Maddie in direct opposition to her own sister and her own brother on a national stage. The Gosselin family had always been geographically divided between two different households since the divorce. But now it was also publicly divided between two completely competing versions of what had actually happened inside that home growing up. Hannah, throughout all of this swirling firestorm, held her own lane carefully and refused to escalate any of it further. She had said everything she needed to say inside that Vice studio, and she chose not to issue any counterstatements, not to fight with her own sister on social media, and not to keep responding to every new development as it unfolded. She gave just one brief and measured quote to an interviewer in early 2024 when asked specifically about her current relationship with her mother. She said simply that they talk about school and life, and that Kate is still her mom. 4 words, carrying the entire weight of years of complicated family conflict beneath them. But the most genuinely consequential fallout from Kate's detailed Instagram statement was not even directed at Hannah at all. It was directed at Colin, and this next part is honestly heartbreaking to walk through. After graduating from high school alongside Hannah in June of 2023, Colin had enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He has openly described that enlistment as one of the very few real ambitions he held above absolutely everything else in his entire life. He made it successfully through training. He was incredibly close to actually graduating from the program. And then the military went back and reviewed his official records and found documentation of his childhood institutionalization sitting there in writing. Colin said in his own words about what happened next that he was towards the end of training, very close to graduating, when the paperwork was looked into, and they found out that he had been in an institution at one point in his life, and that they did not need any deeper reason than that. Being in an institution was good enough to discharge a recruit. He was discharged from the Marines almost immediately. He is currently appealing the decision, has enrolled to study finance at Penn State University, and in early 2025 he launched his own pressure washing business called Gosselin Pressure Washing, LLC. What Hannah had been quietly building underneath all of this public family war playing out around her was something no one in the entire Gosselin story had ever actually managed to create before now. A real life that genuinely belonged to her alone. Who Hannah Gosselin is now. On May 10th of 2022, the entire group of Gosselin sextuplets all turned 18 years old together on the same day. On that exact same day, Hannah Gosselin announced the official launch of her own skincare brand, which she named Gosselin Girl Beauty, at a celebration party held at the Sugar Factory in Miami. And that timing was very clearly not an accident at all. The day she legally became an adult was the exact same day she introduced herself to the entire world entirely on her own terms, in her own voice, under a name that she had personally trademarked before any other single member of her family had thought to try doing the same. The skincare line that she launched that day is all natural, fully vegan, certified cruelty-free, and proudly made in the United States. Her current product range includes fruit-forward facial serums and elixirs designed specifically for younger consumers. On the brand's official About page, she describes herself in language that is genuinely pointed in its simplicity. She writes that she is Hannah Gosselin, the one that giggled nonstop and was always seen as the instigator of fun in the family. In 2024, Hannah and her father Jon appeared together on the Tamron Hall show in New York City for a segment that was officially built around their shared wellness journey together as a family. The two of them together had successfully lost a combined 75 pounds. But what was genuinely striking about that entire television appearance was not actually the weight loss at all. It was the absolute ordinariness of the whole thing. Just two human beings who had finally found their way back to each other after years of someone else's storytelling, deciding for them who they were supposed to be in public view. If Hannah's story moved you the same way it has moved me sitting here telling it, please drop your thoughts down in the comments below.